Well, as those talks get underway in Beijing, key copper and aluminium contracts are rising, really as the market weighs any likely outcome coming through. Well, let's get more on this and some of the currency moves as well. Peter McGuire, CEO of XM, is joining us live from Sydney. Welcome to the program, Peter. Good to see you there. In the Asian session today, we are watching rebar really rising. It's not just some of the talk around trade, but traders really underlying strong demand coming through in China and stockpiles falling.
Yeah, well, that's exactly right, Nadine. And when you're looking at it, it's been a very strong demand picture all through Asia, certainly in China. And from a consumption side, these storylines aren't changing. Rolling across to the other base metals as well, there's stronger demand coming through, and I think it's just a continuance over the rest of this decade and certainly leading into the 2020s. So there's a lot of building, a lot of cranes and a lot of construction. I was in India last week. They're building around about 30 kilometres of motorway a day, and China producing, I believe it's about 40 or 50 kilometres a day. So huge consumption across all of the metals and, of course, the oil factor.
Yeah, and we're watching this glow sort of extend to iron ore. Curious to get your thoughts, Peter, because we on Friday will see China allowing foreign investors to trade in Dalian's iron ore futures. So that's just tomorrow. I mean, how much of an impact do you think that's likely to have on iron ore futures?
I think it'll add to the speculator side. Traders look for movement naturally, and they're looking for anything that goes up or down. They don't really like it going sideways unless they're writing options or designing strategies in that fashion. But as far as traders, they're adding the horsepower to the market. You've got your producers, and on the other side of the trade are the speculators. And I think that if you're looking at the Chinese traders, they're very engaged across FX and, of course, the commodity sector. And this is going to, I think, add more volatility and more liquidity to the market.
Yeah, so we will again be wondering how much the iron ore price is being driven, by speculators as opposed to real demand. Well, so making it harder to read that market.
Yeah, it is harder to read the market, and that just adds, I think, let's see if the hedge funds get involved like they've done, of course, in the oil sector for many, many years now, and that's been, some magnificent trading on their behalf really from the start of 14, and we've been a bull market really since February 9 of, crude oil.
Peter, I'm curious to just switch to Forex. You did mention, Forex trading. We've seen the Australian dollar, as I mentioned off the top, getting a sugar hit from this trade data that came through today. And we're seeing some consolidation in the US dollar today as well in the wake of the FOMC. Yeah. But do you think that this downtrend has been broken for the Aussie dollar, or is this just a knee-jerk reaction? Well,
I think it's a little bit of a knee-jerk. I still believe the Larry Kudlow thought, and I think that there's momentum there that's going to push the US higher, maybe not this week and maybe not next, but certainly over the following weeks and leading into the US summer. So as that gains momentum, there could be a rate rise this time next month or sometime very soon. And I think you'll see a continuance over that summer period, which in turn is going to add more horsepower to the US dollar, sitting at around about 92 approximate for the US dollar index, off its lows of 88, 89. And one needs to only put their mind back when around about November of 16, at the election there, it was at 103. So it's been very volatile, and I think it's an upward trend at the moment.
Okay, so when it comes to this global growth story that's obviously in the US in particular helping to fuel the greenback's rise, you mentioned being in India and seeing the economy powering ahead there, China as well. Europe, though, seems to be a bit of a different story. Europe is I guess, a blight on this continued global growth story. Or, you look like you're not agreeing. Are you thinking that some of the weakness we've seen in the data might be transitory in Europe?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's turning around. It seems to be a fairly, they're having some fairly good numbers coming out of, the Frances, and maybe, the likes of Italy are still hemorrhaging a little bit, and Spain's turning around a bit. Certainly Germany is producing at, strong numbers, and they're knocking the ball out of the park. And I think Europe's going through that structural change. If you're looking at the likes of what Draghi's been able to achieve and increasing, quantitative easing or their own fashion of it, they're not backing off, and I think it's just going to be, an onward and upward for the euro in the sense of the continent. moving forward, the rest of 18 and certainly 19 and 20, I think there's a bit of sunshine on their back on that one, Nadine.
So when it comes to the inflation reads that we're expecting out of the Eurozone, though, I mean, do you anticipate that they, might move the needle at all when it comes to the euro? Because you'd think that it would come under further pressure if they disappoint in the slightest.
Well, you would think so, but I think first off, we've just got to see what happens with that US dollar, and of course, leading in with the US raising rates and inflation across there. Let's see what happens with energy prices and those factored in. If crude holds at these sort of levels or edges higher, then that's going to certainly add from an inflation side. So it's just a wait-and-see approach. And I think there's a bit of time on Euro's hands to see what impact the US has in the short to medium term. Try and revisit this in around about August. I think we'll get a better idea.
All right. Well, then you mentioned oil. What's your current outlook for oil, and what is it dependent on? Are you looking at it from fundamentals, through geopolitical lens, or through technicals?
Well, I think you've got to look at it US dollar. You've got to look at what's happening with Iran. You've got to be conscious as far as the Venezuela and Angola and those, crimping of production. I would have to say that I'd have to remain bullish, considering it's been in that uptrend since around about the February the 9th, and this will be a 3 to 3.5 month. Interesting what'll happen over the summer season. And if you get further geopolitical concerns, I don't think Yemen's been put to bed, nor Iran at the moment. So let's just wait and see how those factor in. Next meeting around about the 22nd or so of June in Vienna for OPEC. And I think they'll be happy with what's happened as far as production. So in turn, I think that's a little bit stronger from here, Nadine.
All right. Peter McGuire, nice to catch up. Thank you so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
We will take a short break. When we return, we'll check in on the day's top and bottom movers, find out what's pushing this market higher. Back in a moment.